Good evening and welcome to City Limits, the show that provides you with information about the people, places, and events that shape the character of our community. Joining me tonight is Tim Fisher, Executive Director of St. Louis County Municipal League.
And have been since 1990, a great organization to work for.
There you go. Well, you've been an excellent executive director because City of Blackjack, of course, is a member of the St. Louis County Municipal League.
Yeah, one of our most active members, and we're glad to have that activity from all of your city council members.
Sounds great. Well, we try. We try to come as a group if we can, and that makes, it kind of adds to the camaraderie.
No, it sure does. You have by far the largest regular contingent at our monthly meetings.
Except I killed the record last time, right? Unfortunately. Well, we'll have to work on that. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about some different type of topics tonight, but stuff that mainly affect municipalities. So let's start with the veto session. Were there any bills that either got passed or didn't get overridden, terrible, overridden concerning municipalities?
There were some bills, and we have, I think, both at the state and the federal level, more ideological bills that somehow have language in them that has unintended consequences. And there's things like, that would make it illegal for a local police officer to give out the name of a gun owner or something like that, even talking about a crime or something. And so we understand the intent was to not allow gun owners, lists of gun owners just to be, given out randomly as if they're targeted for some reason. But to never be able to mention somebody's name who owns a gun is a whole different thing. And so you'd have all these accidental violations of law. So that was one the governor vetoed, and there was not quite enough votes to override that one. So that had a lot of our law enforcement people nervous about accidental violations. But most of the things that were dealt with in the veto session did not have much of an impact on local governments. There were some, the tax bill had interesting pros and cons to it. It was a pretty significant tax decrease. The governor also felt it would have underfunded our state schools and universities. But also, I think a mistake was that they were going to start taxing food and textbooks again at the state level. And eventually the legislature came up short of the votes to override that bill, and there's a good chance they'll come back with a similar bill that doesn't have what appear to be those unintentional errors in them in 2014, but we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, they always tend to bring them back no matter what happens. They try to get you and try to keep passing. And I guess with the term limits, they almost have to do it that way.
Well, we do have a super majority in both the House and Senate of Republicans, and the governor's a Democrat. Mm-hmm. So they have the ability to override the governor's veto. And in fact, in the veto session, they did override a number of his vetoes. But a number of his vetoes were also sustained. So with that type of super majority, it's easier to do than when you don't have that type of super majority and you have to get bipartisan support to override vetoes. So, but term limits also have a bearing on various types of activities in Jefferson City. I think sometimes the bills just simply aren't as well written. And you also notice that in the years I've been going to Jefferson City, working for the Municipal League and trying to make sure that the laws they pass don't do damage to municipal governments, there's less discussion about the impact of the bills, is my sense of it. That people say, well, let's just do this, and other people, because they don't have a lot of experience in the State House, kind of say, well, okay, that sounds all right to me. But in the past, when you had legislators who were serving longer terms, just like a lot more about municipal government because you've been mayor for a long time, so you kind of have certain insights into things, and when they're brought up by people who mean well but are kind of new, sometimes you take a little time to explain to them why maybe that's not such a good idea. And that's what seems to be missing with term limits, in my opinion, in Jeff City now.
Yeah, there's no knowledge of what's happened in the past or whatever, so historical knowledge is gone.
It used to be too, when there was something kind of controversial among groups that maybe particularly in the Senate and to a certain extent in the House, they'd bring the parties together and say, this group was proposing this, and I know this would have an impact on you, and do you have some ideas on how maybe some of these goals could be met but wouldn't upset the apple cart? And they try to have people talk more, and now it almost seems like, well, let's see if we can get a sneak amendment on something, and the other side will never know until the bill's been passed, and then it's too late for them to try to stop it. So there's not the goal of trying to get people together to understand each other's interests and work things out. And as a result of that, you end up, frankly, in court more often, because if you don't have a way to work things out in the legislature, lots of times your only alternative then is to go to court. So we're seeing more lawsuits over legislation now, and then the courts get criticized for becoming legislators, and they really don't want it. The judges don't want to be legislators, but if somebody files suit, they have to deal with it. The whole school mess is an example of that, where the courts tried not to do it, make any final decisions. The lower courts were ruling that things had to change, but the legislature wouldn't make changes. And finally, the Supreme Court said, we just can't wait any longer. The law is defective, and we're going to rule that it's defective. And now everybody's up in arms about the impact on the schools, and it probably should have been dealt with earlier. But again, the courts are too often a resolution for legislation or lack of legislation to correct some significant issues.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part nowadays is that more and more of the legislation is going the route of the courts.
That's right.
Which makes it a little bit different. Someone I seen a cartoon. I think it was in a Columbia newspaper or something. They showed the Supreme Court. They showed the legislature here, and then they showed the Supreme Court before it went to the governor. They told them whether it was good or bad. Which, it's unfortunate that it is that way. But it's something you can't get out of a book. You don't learn, as you said, you do not learn how to legislate and the effects by coming in as a first termer, and 8 years and they're out.
Yeah.
So it does make it very difficult. It is very challenging.
And we have a very large legislature. Between the House and Senate, it's about 200 members, and they're divided up into committees and so forth. But if you can really get the parties together who are affected by legislation, and to the extent possible, try to work out the differences and get it through committee and help people understand what you're doing and kind of get it off on the right track, you have a much better chance of it not going to court and being overturned by the court.
Sounds great. Well, let's change topics here a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about St. Louis County Municipal League and what it is, what the goals are, and how old it is, and so on. Let's just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go into some other topics.
Yeah, it really has an interesting historical background. We're going way back now into World War I in the 19-teens. Probably a lot of the viewers realize that the city of St. Louis removed itself from St. Louis County about the time of the Civil War in the 1870s. So people who lived in the county didn't have a municipality then to provide services. You might contrast that with Kansas City, which to this day continues to annex land. But St. Louis City froze its boundaries. We call it roughly a long skinker. So you had people in the county. We had won World War I. People had a lot of great faith in America and exuberance. And at the time, we had a lot of dirt roads, and utilities weren't very common in a lot of places and so forth. So if you're going to have modernize America, you needed local governments to do it, and we needed those in the county. We had some cities in the county at the time, so particularly some of the older ones along the city of St. Louis limits, and we had some that were out further that were kind of almost like a stagecoach or a horse ride out near the river, Missouri River. They'd stop there for the night. Or maybe get out as far as Manchester as they rode out from the city going toward Jefferson City. So there were some little places that existed in St. Louis County at that time too. But they wanted roads, and they wanted telephones, and they wanted gas lines, and they wanted electric lines, and they wanted to make sure we didn't have much crime in America then in the sense that we do today, but they wanted to make sure that there was a way to deal with crime issues and so forth. So they began to form more cities. And a number of the city mayors at that time and the city attorneys from 7 or 8 cities got together and said, we really need to go to Jefferson City together. St. Louis City and Kansas City and some of the big cities had laws, state laws that helped regulate how they would grow and develop, but a lot of the suburban cities did not. So it was time to go to Jeff City for the suburban cities in St. Louis County as a group. And so they formed a municipal league back in 1918 to be that voice for them collectively going to Jefferson City. And then things grew from there. We had a number of cities were formed in the 20s. Then there was kind of a slowdown. And then the St. Louis County became a charter county and picked up land use controls, planning and zoning controls in the 1950s. And a lot of people didn't want St. Louis County to be making that decision for them. So a lot of cities were then formed in the late 40s and into the 50s, kind of the second ring of cities. And we have a lot of those cities that are celebrating their 50th or 60th anniversary now that were formed after World War II. And as those cities were formed, they joined a municipal league, and people like yourself, the mayors and councilmen, come together and work together on trying to formulate policies that they want to work together within Jefferson City, or policies that would help them work together as cities, or for cities to use services that St. Louis County may offer, and all the things that go with trying to cooperate in a large and complex urban county. So we spend a lot of our time in Jefferson City working with legislators on policies and tax issues and zoning issues and where cell phone towers can go. And as things evolve, more issues come up, and all those things end up on our plate. We think the best way to try to work through those is to get as many people together that have been elected by the citizens in St. Louis County and try to work through them.
Yeah, one of the things that y'all did about a year or so ago was come up with standards, or suggested standards, or purely voluntary standards for municipalities. And I think it was, mainly for the smaller municipalities, but, it could also be incorporated in the larger municipalities if they didn't do that particular function.
Right.
How has that been working, and, what's the status of that?
Nobody really likes to be regulated, but it was an interesting process because as we talked with more and more cities about it, more and more began to nod their head and say, yes, we really should work at it on a voluntary basis within our association. We know most about cities, so instead of somebody else telling us what we ought to do, we ought to try to make sure our own members uphold reasonable standards. So it has to do with getting audits and having checks and balances on your books at City Hall. So it's not just one person handling them where it makes it too easy for fraud. Talks about at least having the availability of 2 police officers, particularly for the very small communities, on duty all the time. And if you can't afford that, then the recommendation would be that you contract with a larger department to make sure that you could always have 2 police officers available, so you don't have just one police officer, particularly in the middle of the night, responding to a bad situation. You could always have at least 2. Then, of course, you can call in neighbors, who we all have mutual aid and depend on each other a lot in bigger situations, whether it's crime or fires or what have you. So we went through those sets of standards, and there's 10 major ones that have to do with some of those issues like finance and hiring and police and public safety. And then there's a number of smaller ones under each one that talk about exactly how you would manage those topics. And we've been going out meeting with cities, and it's interesting, a lot of the mayors of the smaller cities have been encouraging their fellow mayors, whether they're men or women, to also adopt those standards. So it's kind of some peer pressure, which is probably the best kind. that says, maybe you're not doing as good a job as you could be doing. Why don't you consider adopting standards that would raise your city standards up to what we think is a reasonable level in our county? So it's been a very positive and productive experience to see the cities that never really thought in detail about some of those issues. Some of these cities may not even have any employees, they contract for everything. But it gave them some pause to stop and think about, well, how well is our money being watched? And how much thought have we given to the way our police protection is provided? Do we just contract with somebody and then just assume everything is okay and that sort of thing? So it's...
Well, by and large, mayor and council of cities change quite often. They also do not have, you can't get a textbook. I mean, you can get a textbook that says, hey, in general, you do this, this, and this. But how each individual city does it is a little different. Mm-hmm. And, unless they've experienced that, that's a very good thing. And also with the transparency now that the constituents want, that really helps a lot. With the audits, one of the things was to get an audit.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
One of the other things was to take and have your books open when,
Mm-hmm.
not only at audit time,
Mm-hmm.
but throughout the, year, and try to be more transparent, mm-hmm. which, really helps, I would think, the city's interface with their constituency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there really shouldn't be anything secret about that. And most of our cities have websites, and some of the cities even go as far as putting their check ledger, so you can see every single check that's written by a community on the city's website. So it's been a positive experience. To dovetail with that, we also started a training academy. So every month we have a 1 hour long training program, and it's great for municipal employees, but the reason we limit it to an hour and try to cover a very simple, discrete topic is so that elected officials who work full-time somewhere else at a regular job could use their lunch hour to attend by computer through a webinar process, so they can log in and watch the training program for that hour, or we record them and they can watch it at some other time. The only disadvantage of that is you can't ask questions because it's been recorded. But if you can come in during that 1 hour when it's live, you also have the opportunity to ask questions. So last month, for example, we did one on the Board of Adjustment, which has to do with land use decisions. If the planning and zoning makes a decision and the homeowner thinks it's unfair, they can appeal to the Board of Adjustment rather than going to court. So it's a little simpler quasi-judicial process. And then we had a number of people who asked us to do something on the history of municipal courts, because they're a little smaller and a little simpler than the county courts. And so we have Judge Vatterott, who's the judge in Overland and has over 30 years experience and a lot of training background, is going to do a seminar for us later this month on how municipal courts operate and the role of the court clerk and the various types of court costs that are involved, and whether you can have a jury trial in a municipal court, which you cannot. You have to send those over to the county court where the judges know how to conduct jury trials and so forth. But a lot of people have said, I'm not really sure how the municipal court works in detail. It'd be nice to have a program on that. So we try to address the 10 basic goals to make sure everybody's up to snuff, but we also try to provide other programs that the municipal officials ask us to arrange.
I think I'm going to maybe attend that one, because I was interested in the court, and that's in in a mayor's particular case, we don't get involved in the courts, because once it goes from the ticket process or whatever, we're completely out of the picture at that point. So I might get to.
Yeah, it is interesting that the judge actually works for the city, but because you pay the judge, mm-hmm. and you have ordinances that establish some court orders and so forth. You pass the ordinances that the prosecutor has to take to the judge when there's a violation of that ordinance, but the courts are really ruled by the Supreme Court and their standards, whether it's the county court or municipal court. So it's the judge almost has multiple bosses in a way, but you're right. The city officials are not to tamper with the city courts.
As a city official, if you tamper with the courts, you talk to another judge, and you may be
Out of office
in
or
jail
something.
and out of office.
Yeah. So we
depending
do,
on it.
in America,
Yeah.
our system does treat our three divisions of government very separately, and they are not to interfere with each other. So you have to figure out, obviously you've got a budget for them, and you've got to provide a court clerk, and the court clerk has to make sure that he or she is following both the ordinances of the city and the directives of the court. And so, the two have to get along, but but the courts are separate from the administration of the city.
Right, and it's an interesting proposition, not only with the judge, as you mentioned, with the court clerk, because part-time she works for the city, part-time she works for the courts. So it's kind of an interesting proposition. Let's talk a little bit about the legislature now is looking at governance in St. Louis County, and historically there's been always a what shall we say, a discussion concerning sales tax and how it's distributed, and some other issues that affect all municipalities or affect all of us to one degree or another, whether an A city or a B city. And I know people probably don't understand what an A city or a B city is, but depending on the type of city you are, and actually even the class of city, whether you're a charter versus where you're a statutory city or a charter city, makes a big difference. What are they doing now, and what are they kind of looking? Because I know you've been attending the meetings, and
Right.
they're taking a look at it.
I don't know. We have a fairly unique system in St. Louis County of sharing some taxes, and that's largely a function, I think, of two things. One, we have a lot of cities. So some cities have a strong tax base and some cities have a weak tax base depending on what you tax. Well, we tend to have shifted from property taxes to sales taxes in our county over the last 30 years. So if you don't have many stores, then you don't generate very much sales tax. If you have a lot of stores, you can generate a tremendous amount of sales tax. Well, if you combine that with the number of cities we have, and some of them having small populations, you end up where some cities with a small population and a shopping center end up with a very high amount of taxes coming in, and you could have a larger city without very many stores and they'd have a very low. So there's some sharing that goes on. That's the general concept of it. But every 10, 15 years, a question comes up, was that sharing right? And there are changes that occur in St. Louis County where some areas get poorer and some get richer, and just as a normal course of evolution in metropolitan areas. So a couple years ago, the question came up again, is the sharing right? And some cities felt like they were being required to share too much, and others felt, well, not enough is being shared, and it's kind of like I say, the argument issues that come up every 10 or 15 years. We established a very broad-based committee, let anybody join who wanted to join from any of the municipalities in St. Louis County, and they basically felt that the system we have now is about right. They suggested a few little tweaks that had to kind of do with fairness issues, should you be getting a lot of money from another city if you weren't even trying to raise any yourself, and some of those things, some of that applied to St. Louis County. And we issued a report. Well, again, that didn't make it, although probably 80% of our members supported that, there's still some who didn't, and they either wanted more sharing again or less sharing. That led to this creation of a second committee. This is called a joint committee this year. It's made up of House members and senators. They're all from St. Louis County, with the exception of one who actually lives in the city of St. Louis, but whose Senate district extends into St. Louis County. And they can study whatever they want, actually, just about. But it seems like the issues are kind of focusing on are the sales tax sharing, tax increment financing, the issue of how cities grow or can be incorporated. And we have a boundary commission who regulates that. And some feel that law has become kind of anti-city. And it's not really fair to say, well, you have too many small cities and then have a boundary commission that makes it tough for you to grow. I mean, it doesn't really jive. So I think some people want to take a look at that. So the committee at this point is looking for consultants who might help them study some of those issues, and they're going to have a hearing the end of the month to receive proposals from consultants. The tricky thing is that this, in the resolution that set up the joint committee, it says that no state money can be used to pay the consultants. So, and it's supposed to be an independent study, so you have to, if you're going to find a funding source, it has to be a funding source that doesn't have a dog in the fight. So it's a little bit confusing to try to figure out where this is going to go. They have said that they will not be writing legislation. They'll be issuing a report, and whether legislation in 2014 perhaps comes up as a result of that committee is yet to be seen. But there's a lot of issues at hand, and I think that we're trying to help the committee understand how much cooperation there is among the municipalities and St. Louis County and others. I mentioned briefly earlier about mutual aid. You know, if we have a big fire someplace, fire districts and cities send trucks from all over, maybe even from another county, come in and help. And when those trucks then leave, let's say if Ferguson goes to help University City, we don't want to leave Ferguson without fire service or ambulance. So then maybe somebody from Blackjack will send an ambulance just to a firehouse in Ferguson just to be on call. So we constantly have that high level of intergovernmental cooperation, particularly on public safety. The police departments, are very, very supportive of each other when there's a significant incident. And if you know something big is going to be going on, like a presidential debate or a big football game or something, you plan that in advance to have extra police officers from surrounding areas to help out. So everybody really has, I think, a very strong spirit of intergovernmental cooperation. And then there's a lot of smaller examples. Swimming pools are shared, because not every city has a swimming pool and shouldn't. So they share. It makes more sense. The city that hosts it has some revenue coming in from the non-residents who come over and help fill it up so it runs efficiently. And the city that sends the residents there doesn't have the cost of building their own swimming pool, which can be prohibitive. And that's true when it comes to libraries and recreation. So, you can borrow a book in any library because there's all intergovernmental relations between all the various libraries we have. And cities share equipment, particularly if there's a major storm or something. Cities send crews to the neighboring cities to help out. So there's not a day that goes by that there's not examples of intergovernmental cooperation. And that's why you can have 90 cities in a county like ours and it'll work, as opposed to maybe some places where they're always at each other's throat or see each other too isolated.
Yeah, we have a lot of cooperation amongst our cities. Well, as we wrap up here, I have one final question to ask you, Tim. Where did you go to high school?
Well, that's a good question.
Everybody that.
I actually grew up in Cincinnati, so I went to a school there called St. Xavier's, kind of like a DeSmet here, I guess, or something.
Okay, well.
So I came out here to go to school then after high school. So that's kind of my story about high school.
Sounds great. Hey, I've had people from Russia and Kazakhstan and so on answer that question, so that's very good.
The old St. Louis question.
Thank you, Tim, for the interview. It's very, very interesting, very informative.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have you back soon.
I'd like to do that.
Thank you for watching our show this evening. If you have any questions for me, please contact me at www.cityofblackjack.com, or you can call me at area code 314-355-0400.